Good afternoon and welcome everyone. Thank you for taking the time to participate in today's live webinar, where we'll be exploring the impact of mealtimes during outbreaks in long-term care. Before we get started, you'll notice that we've muted all of your lines to eliminate any background noise and distractions. We ask that you remain self-muted until the end of our session, where we'll invite you to engage and to share some of your experiences, either by speaking up or by typing into the chat box. Today's webinar is being recorded for education purposes, and the recording will be made available to you following the session. The webinar slide deck is also available to you under the materials section of the Go-To Training toolbar. Our guest presenter today, who we're very excited about, is Professor Heather Keller, Schlegel Research Chair in Nutrition and Aging and Professor of Kinesiology at the University of Waterloo. Heather is a research scientist in the area of agri-food for healthy aging at the Research Institute for Aging. Welcome, Heather, and thank you for being with us this afternoon.
Thanks very much, Melissa. So it's my pleasure today to be talking with you about basically the impact we're seeing in mealtimes right now with the COVID-19 precautions that are put in place in various provinces across the country. And much of what we'll be doing is hopefully discussing, as Melissa indicated. I think we have lots to learn from each other, and we wanted to make sure we had lots of time in this conversation today so that people could ask questions of others and share best practices. I'm just going to move to the next slide. So this is a picture of what I look like, and I just wanted to give a sense of what I do in terms of research. So I do research in all areas of healthcare, long-term care, retirement homes, acute care hospitals, and primary care, all with the view of trying to improve food intake and nutritional health of older adults. With respect to long-term care, I have two key areas that I work on. One is around the idea of enhancing mealtimes in residential settings, and the other is trying to improve the quality of food in residences as well. And today we're going to be speaking about that first area, which is the mealtime experience. So mealtimes matter. I think we all know that intuitively in some shape or form. This is a definition that comes from a social background, sort of a sociology background, the way they think about meals. But you can see based on this definition, the idea is that meals are social. And I think all of us with the various social distancing that we've been living with the last few months recognize how incredibly important meals are to that social interaction that we have. And it gives us the opportunity to share food with others in a way that is unique. I have done some work in this area for almost a decade or a little bit more than a decade now, and recognize through talking with persons living with dementia in the community and their care partners the importance of mealtimes. And I just want to share with you one quote from that study called the Eating Together study. This is a person with dementia saying this was what it was like to have mealtimes in their family. It's an opportunity to communicate, to clarify, reaffirm our positions and situations, caring for each other, and learning something. All of those things. That is the mealtime is a great place for that. So it's not surprising that with respect to long-term care and residential care, meals are a huge part of the activities and social connectedness that residents and team members feel, and why we wanted to focus today on this area. We know from a variety of research that mealtimes are important in this setting. Specifically, I've completed a big study called Making the Most of Mealtimes, which was conducted in 4 provinces of Ontario in 32 nursing homes. And one of the key papers that came out of that project was published in 2017. And it showed that eating with others in a dining room that was more person-centered, relationship-centered, promoted food intake. And so we know that from this study, as well as other studies, that eating with others in long-term care promotes better food intake and thus hopefully health as well for the older adult. But in addition to food and health, mealtimes also give something to residents. And so these are the things that we've uncovered in our various research projects, one being the Eating Together study, but also other studies that I've done since then. that meals in long-term care and residences can give us a sense of connection to others at our tables, connection to the home in general, connection to family, etc. It can also honor the dignity of a person. They can feel like they're important, that they matter. It can provide an offering of support when they need it, whether it be psychological support or physical support with respect to care. It also gives a sense of identity, who you are as a person, the foods that you value, the foods that you prefer, the way you like to eat. All of those reinforce that you are an individual in this setting. It gives an opportunity to create opportunities. For example, taking on a role that you feel valued. For example, helping make the menus in the home, or helping to identify best products that the home can offer, or helping in terms of setting tables. All of those are roles that are valued, and residents and families can get involved in those. And then finally, mealtimes are really about enjoyment. I've been saying for a long time that mealtimes are the activity of home. Everybody participates in them in some shape or form, regardless of their capacity. And so mealtimes could be the single activity that everybody gets included in and helps to make them feel like they are really connected to their environment and enjoying their life. However, the reality is that sometimes our residences are institutional in their feel. And this paper was done by one of my students several years ago. And what we had done in this study was followed the person-centered dimension, their care partners who were living in the community originally into retirement homes and long-term care homes. And this is what they said about mealtimes in a residence. They were told where to eat, when to eat, what to eat, and with whom to eat. So this loss of that control that you have of your own meals in your own home is gone. Also, you have to sometimes give over your individual preferences and your traditional foods to the way that is the food provision in the home. So there's the idea that we have to serve the many rather than the individual in a long-term care home. And what will most residents want? What will be pleasing to most residents? But that means some will not get their preferred foods. We also know that the regulations and policies often override what residents may want. For example, where they may want to eat, or how they might want to eat, or with whom. And then finally, documentation, which is also required, especially in Ontario, often emphasizes food intake over the enjoyments. There's a lot of food for just the well-being of the person and not thinking about the mealtime as the experience and the activity that can be nurturing and enriching for their quality of life. What they basically said was that the daily ritual of a family meal no longer is there. And they're not getting that sense of what is the quality of their life, basically, from meals when they move into an institutional environment. So I wanted to start off with our first polling question. And if you could, on the poll, rate at the current time the home that you live or work in, how would you rate it in terms of being very home-like to being very institutional, 5 being very institutional at the current time?
We'll just leave the poll up for another few seconds. We've got about half of our participants have voted. I do apologize. Okay. There were a few people, Heather, who said they were having difficulty using the voting option there, but the responses that have come in the chat box are in line with what we're seeing on the screen, that 3, that middle ground. Seems to be the
exactly. Yeah, and so it looks like between 3, 4, 5 are more common, which means very institutional as compared to more home-like in this current time that we're living in. Thanks, Melissa, for that. So what we've experienced, I think, with COVID-19, wherever you may be, is that it's social isolation. And that's what we wanted to talk with you about today. I want to say up front, I'm not an expert in social isolation by any means, and we wanted to make sure we had lots of time in this conversation today to give your own stories and own thoughts about challenges as well as strategies you're using to overcome social isolation. But what I have heard comes from my mom, who I talk to every day. She lives in a long-term care home and she's 95, and also from colleagues who have been working in this space, thinking about how to make things better. And so having those conversations with individuals, I've tried to bring into this presentation today. So what I'm hearing from folks is that isolation has meant that we're moving towards focus on the basics. And with respect to food and mealtimes in long-term care and other residences, that means delivering edible hot food to the bedside. The reality, though, is when trays are being delivered to rooms, it's often hard to keep the food hot. And so that's a significant challenge that people have been telling me about, and certainly my mom has experienced as well. Another key basic is making sure those individuals who cannot eat on their own get the assistance they need. And so those two things have been driving a lot of what we're seeing with respect to care in long-term care homes, in addition to the needs with respect to keeping food safe and keeping residents and team members safe. What we've also heard from folks, or what I've heard from folks, is that they're talking about the service can be rushed. There might be limited choice of foods that are on offer. There's no time for setup of staff, and someone coming back to make sure things are okay isn't necessarily happening. People might be using disposable dishes and cutlery. That can be a challenge for older adults to use. And then finally, delivering food by staff who are wearing masks and gloves. And so that may make, all of those changes may make residents feel differently about their mealtime experiences. For example, they might feel forgotten, that they don't really matter, that they're not important, or they're left out. And so I'll just give you an anecdote from my mom, for example, when staff started to wear masks a good 12 weeks ago in her home. She said, "I wonder what they're hiding from me." That was the first impression she had. What do I not know that I should know? And so I think we have to realize that how residents and family will interpret our actions are not always the way they're intended. And that can make residents feel a variety of things that might not be positive. So we have our second polling question right now. What types of meal changes have you experienced with respect to COVID-19 precautions in your home? And you can select as many of these as you like.
Okay, we've got about 61% of our participants have got a vote locked in.
Great.
If someone's having an issue with the poll, feel free to let us know in the chat box feature. I do apologize. I'm not sure why that's working for some and not all. So I'm just going to close the poll there and share the results.
Okay, so masks and gowns, of course, are pretty ubiquitous. Disposable dishes are common as well. Meals eaten in residence rooms, and changes to food quality and temperature. Okay, great, thanks for that. So definitely you've seen some of the isolation procedures that we've been hearing about from the field. So the challenges, though, that we're also hearing from folks with respect to isolation are some risks. And that's how this webinar actually came about. There was a concern that we're forgetting with thinking about the basics of food and just getting food to residents. We're missing something about mealtimes. And what I think we might be missing is this idea of the promise of mealtimes and what it can do for the social interaction and quality of life of residents. But what we're seeing are some of these things here. So family are no longer visiting, which means they can't help out with meals anymore. And there is also the loss of emotional and support and social interaction that may happen in or around the timing of a meal. Meals are unobserved for residents that can eat on their own. This means, though, over a 3-month period of time, we haven't been able to see if there's been changes in swallowing or eating capacity, and it's not being picked up necessarily. So again, to give an anecdote, my mom actually had a minor stroke 3 weeks ago now. And initially it wasn't picked up that she was having challenges with cutting her food with disposable cutlery, for example, or spilling her food. And there wasn't the changes put into place as quickly as might have happened if she'd been in a dining room. There's also some questions that people have about the tracking of food consumption. Is it as accurate as we would like? Diverse staff are also doing different roles than they were doing before. And maybe this is resulting in lack of communication on the residents' needs and preferences, especially if there's new staff or temporary staff have been brought in. They may not know how to communicate or what's important to communicate across the team members. There might be also a mismatch between skills and the care needs of residents. Isolation also has changes to staff tasks. So now staff are doing temperature checks twice a day. They're putting on personal protective equipment multiple times in a day. They're doing all of these things, these demands their time to keep residents and team members safe that take time. And this now means there's less time then for social interaction. But the unfortunate flip side is that they're the only opportunity that many residents have for in-person social interaction. And then finally, the other risk that I came up with in my thinking about this was that people are confined to their rooms. And I've seen this again with my own mom, that being confined to a room with limited movement outside of that room, you start to lose function. You're not moving as much, you're not walking as much. Your appetite gets reduced, and depression may result as well. All of these risks have the potential to result in health changes as well. So weight loss, which we know is very negative for older adults living in long-term care, can lead to all sorts of things like falls or pressure injuries. We also see increased frailty of individuals, deterioration of their mental and physical health because of this isolation that is happening in homes. I think as well with COVID-19, it's a crisis that we've had to live with, and wherever you may be, it's made clear what is important to us, what our priorities are. And we do know that certainly no amount of food or supplements that we put in front of someone will overcome if they're not interested in eating. Anybody who's worked in long-term care with individuals who have poor appetite knows that. We can put all sorts of food in front of folks, but they will not necessarily eat it if their appetite is poor. What we do know works for appetite is this idea of having an interest in life, a sense of purpose, and social facilitation. It's been shown in long-term care residences as well as outside of long-term care that the idea of eating with others will stimulate appetite, food, and fluid intake. So it's something we should try to do as much as we can, possibly, even in an outbreak situation. In addition, crises like COVID-19 has helped us to identify the weaknesses in our system. And I'm sure you've heard lots of that about the weaknesses in long-term care across the country, in the newspapers and in various other media. The underfunding is certainly there and affects staff as well as food, though, and food quality. We often think about staff, the nursing staff that take care of our residents, but we also have to think about the dietary staff. And if we don't have enough of those dietary folks, we can't make good quality food in the home, regardless of how much money we might have for food itself. So the dietary staff and the food that we have are also part of that concern about underfunding. Another key issue, though, is the aging infrastructure that we have that can't accommodate changing needs. So many homes have a central kitchen that, in this situation now with often trace service to rooms, residents' rooms, means it's really hard to make sure the food stays hot. They don't have the bulk serveries that might be in a neighborhood dining room, which have a steam table. That's no longer available. So we have to think differently about our infrastructure, perhaps, to support the needs of individuals in normal conditions as well as during outbreaks. And I'm sure you've heard other ideas around the aging infrastructure and how it's impacted infection risk as well. So we're next at our next polling question, and here we want you to give a sense, now being 3 months post precautions being put into place, what is your thinking now at basically weighing the differences between quality of life and safety for residents? Is keeping residents safe more important than promoting quality of life? So our options there are: safety and minimizing risk is most important for all residents. Safety is more important than quality of life for most, but not all residents. Safety and quality of life for residents are equally important for all residents. And quality of life is more important than safety for most, but not all. And quality of life is most important for everybody.
So we've got about 60% of our participants have locked in a vote of some kind. There are still a few people commenting in the chat box that they are having some challenges. So there are a few additional responses that unfortunately are reflected here, but I will close the poll. It seems fairly apparent that there's a shared collective response happening here.
Yeah. So the idea that we have to basically balance the tension between quality of life and safety. I think we're realizing that now, right? We're being into this 3 months, that it's not like a short 1 week infection outbreak with the flu, which might affect a few residents. When something like this is happening across the entire home for a long period of time, we have to think about quality of life as well. Thanks, Melissa. So, as I said at the outset, I've got some ideas, but I'm not the expert on all the ways we can think about practically how to do meals now in our current norm of living with COVID-19. But I have come up with some ideas from talking with colleagues and doing similar sorts of presentations over the last little while, and come up with some ideas for back in the dining room, as well if you're still in the situation of having tray delivery to residents' rooms, some things that might be worth trying. And I'm hoping in our discussion we'll have a lot more comments from folks who are living this situation right now in long-term care homes, and give us a sense of what things they think might be relevant and practicable for going back to the dining room and keeping residents in the rooms, what we can do to promote meal times to make them about quality of life as well as about safety. So my mom's home actually just went back to dining room service last week, which she was incredibly appreciative of. She said it was so nice to use real china again, have real cups, have real cutlery, especially because she's having some challenges with self-feeding right now with her stroke. So things to consider to make this something appreciated and really valued by the residents, which I'm sure it will be, but to make it even better. Think about who they should sit with and be with at that table, because typically now it's 2 persons at most to a table, or even alone. And 2 seatings are often being offered as well, rather than 1 dining time. Try to think about making the mealtime the activity of the day, so not rushing it. So rather than trying to take 2 seatings and squish it into an hour and 15 minutes, which would have been the full mealtime in the past, think about how you can extend that and make it truly meaningful and sufficient time for residents, especially if they're back in the rooms again right after the meal. Try to take the time to chat or stimulate conversation at the table as well. It's through simple things as when you're serving, take the time to chat and think about talking about the outside world for individuals and getting them a little bit interested in matters outside of the home. That really helps to improve mood, helps them to start the conversation at the table, for example, and makes it feel like it's a social interaction. There are some checklists that we'll show at the end in terms of where you can go to get those that I created as part of the Choice Plus training program that might give you some ideas about how to be more relationship-centered at mealtimes for staff and their interactions with residents. And then consider how families and volunteers might be integrated further at this point now that you're back into the dining room and having 2 seatings a day. Most homes, though, might be still doing tray service. And so there are some things that we can do that might be able to support the social connectiveness that we're missing because we're no longer in the dining room. So for example, encouraging family to call their loved one before a meal. I do this myself. I call my mom at 4 every day, or she calls me, one or the other. And this is really, I've noticed, very important for her. We talk about the food she's eating, what she's liking or not liking. And of course, food's a huge conversation point in our lives regardless. But it helps to lift her mood and look forward to the supper meal, which I think a lot of residents would really appreciate, I think. It also gives the family the opportunity to show that they're caring and they're wanting to be involved in what's going on in the home, rather than just perhaps talking about other things and other matters that might not be leading to improved mood, for example. Taking the opportunity to provide higher calorie nutritious items for everybody as a standard, because appetite may be reduced. Again, they might be not moving as much, they're not chatting and being with others as much, there might be some depression. So thinking about the likelihood weight loss is going to happen for many, if not all residents in some shape or form, and perhaps promoting a higher calorie nutritious items as the standard. Allow food to be brought in. Much of the food that we buy that is often considered a preference for residents is often packaged. And can we bring those special things in, like Wurz candies or other beverages or things like that that might be packaged and quarantined, if you will, for a few days before they're given to the resident. That again gives a lift to the resident as well as the family, feeling like they're involved and being part of the support. Remember that food equals joy, and focusing on some of the desired foods that individuals have. In the really dire days of the outbreak at my mom's, their home wasn't an outbreak, but in terms of the province, they had ice cream and treats coming around in the afternoon, which really lifted her mood for sure. Take time with setup and encourage, touch residents and speak to them briefly. I think this is really important. If residents are still in the room, this is the only social interaction they're getting. And I know it takes time, but this is perhaps where we can invest in having other staff other than nursing delivering the meals, maybe recreation staff or dietary staff, and taking that little bit extra time just to speak to a resident, encourage them. And if they need some help, providing that help right then at the meal rather than going on to the next resident's room. Use real dishes if you can in cutlery. There's a great webinar done by Suzanne Caring with Dietitians of Canada back in the early days, that's like end of March. And she talked about the fact that our dishwashers are sanitizing our dishes quite fine. And if we're using appropriate precautions when plating, there's no reason to think that we're passing on anything to folks with regular dishes and cutlery. If your food is really being challenged with being hot, think about using a hot delivery cart in some shape or form to support this hot delivery of food. You might follow up the delivery of the food with a meal supporter. So someone who can come along and just check, does the person have everything they need? Are packages opened? Have they spilled anything that needs to be cleaned up? Do you need help with anything? And also to have that person get a check on, you know, are there changes that are happening with this person that no one else has really noticed, like they're not interested in eating, their appetite's poor, or they're not having the same capacity to feed themselves. And then finally, use food delivery as the activity and make it interesting and fun. Can you put a bell on the food cart? Can you decorate the food cart? Can team members put a happy face on their PPEs? Things that make things fun and interesting and show the residents that you're trying to make the most of a difficult situation. I've heard some positives because of COVID-19 as well in long-term care homes. I'm sure you have many examples of positives as well. One is that all hands are on deck now has really become a reality. We've often talked about this idea of all the team members should be involved in meals and providing assistance when needed. I think now the reality is we're seeing that happening. Housekeeping staff, recreation staff, others are getting involved where they may not have in the past. They're now needed desperately to support eating assistance for individuals or provision of food, etc. And make food, and I put in here mobility as well, the activity that can be done by recreation staff and others. For example, in my mom's home, they have a posting of the bingo rather than having actual bingos. They post it by the nursing area in the neighborhood, and my mom has to walk down a long hallway on her own to get there and look at her numbers every day, and then go back to room, and then they deliver a treat if you get your line or your squares all filled in. But the point is making sure people, if they can, get out of their rooms in a way that's safe as possible, like or out of courtyard or whatever, bring activities that can draw them out into those areas and keep them as mobile as possible for as long as possible. Things like an ice cream cart in the afternoon, again, dressing it up, you know, decorating it. I heard of one home out west where they actually had it on a bicycle, and the bicycle had a bell, and the recreation staff were using that bicycle and delivering ice cream and made it a real event of the day. So again, bringing joy back to residents' lives, even though they might be in their rooms. I'm sure you've got lots of other ideas that have made food and mobility activities that support residents at this time. So we have one final polling question for you at this point. Have you seen any positives in your home? And we've come up with 3 that we think might be potentially what you're seeing. And if you have some other ideas, please put them in the chat as well. So have you seen more teamwork happening? Have you seen staff supporting virtual communication with families? Have you seen other innovative program activities? Please let us know.
Okay, I think our 3 options are quite popular, Heather. I just wanted to share a few that have come through the chat box, giving everyone another few minutes with the poll. Individualized activity kits for residents in their room. So again, that resident focus, developing person-centered programming on an individual basis. There was a positive of having additional funding to allow increased staffing in the dietary department. Okay, I'm just going to close and share.
Great. Yeah, the teamwork, you know, and the communication. You know, it's amazing that we have team members helping virtual communication with residents, and I'm hoping that is something that will continue. I must admit, my mom was already using a tablet before COVID-19, and we're so thankful that we had that connection already, so we can keep doing it on a daily basis. So I'm hoping that's something that for residents, especially those living with dementia, that find the tablet a benefit to seeing their families. I hope that's something we can continue. So that's great. Thanks for that.
we had one more example shared in the chat, kind of an unexpected benefit, having the residents dine in their home areas instead of moving to a large main centralized dining room has been a positive thing, because it's less time spent portering or moving residents to and from, and they can have more time enjoying their meals closer to their bedrooms.
Yes, that's a great idea. And even the different locations that they might be eating in. Maybe you actually have some other areas that are more for seating, but the windows are much nicer for the gardens there, and they might be appreciating having that view rather than the front driveway view that they might get from their dining room, right? So there's lots of positives with the change in placement with respect to eating with others. That's great.
Yeah, another home is using their large activity room to give residents who were prior dining in their rooms, they now have an opportunity to eat together using that physical distancing, but in a different environment, as you said, Heather.
Yeah. Yeah, and so how can you even make that physical distancing? So even they're alone, and this has happened in my mom's home. There's some men that choose not to eat with anybody, but I expect that they like being in the general environment of other residents, and that's key, right? Even if you can't sit with a table mate, just eating with others, knowing they're having the same experience is important to see your peers, right? That's great. All right, so we'll move on. So I'm hoping as well that COVID-19 does lead to some long-term care policy reform in whatever province you may be in. For example, I'm hoping that now that we're seeing the importance of eating with others, the importance that meals mean to residents in terms of their quality of life, that we can think about focusing on quality of life and satisfaction as key endpoints, not just how much residents eat and how much they weigh. Focus in as well on meal times and meal as the activity. So rather than keeping our calendars full with a variety of activities, think about how meals can be the activity that gauges and supports all residents in some shape or form. And also this idea of, as Melissa identified in the chat, more resident-centered. We're getting down to the individual and what they need because they're alone in their rooms. What can we do with relationship-centered care as well? So back to the idea that I had, if you're still in the rooms, taking the time to speak with a resident, recognizing this is the only time they might have outside a temperature check and maybe other care activities that might not be as amenable to conversation. This might be the only time to have that more social opportunity for an individual resident. And that's what we call relationship-centered care, supporting the relationship between team members and residents. I hope as well that we'll see sufficient staff with the right skills doing the various activities that are required as part of a meal. I hope as well that we take advantage of recognizing the integral importance of family to what we do in long-term care, dining as well as beyond dining. And then finally, quality, nutritious food that stimulates residents' appetite. So rather than filling the plate, perhaps because that's what's dictated in terms of food groups, etc., to think about what's nutritious, what will residents really like, what might be ethnoculturally appropriate for these individuals, and focusing on quality rather than quantity of food. So those are my hopes as we move forward. I wanted to make sure we had lots of time, and I think we do have about 25 minutes or so to discuss. And I'm hoping that you can either put in the chat or open up your microphone and talk about what challenges you're seeing, and get your colleagues online to identify how maybe they're using strategies to overcome those challenges. And if you've come up with some innovative strategies that you'd like to share that put the promise of Mealtimes back into
Hi, Stephanie.
Sorry, Heather, I cut you off by unmuting the line.
Negative.
Ask everyone to mute themselves if they're able.
Oh my goodness.
I might have to keep people muted, and if you can ask me in the chat box, I can unmute individually. we've got quite a bit of background noise there, so I'm just going to put Sharon Cook on the spot, and if she's got a great question or some sharing in the chat box here. So Sharon, you're unmuted if you'd like to share your example.
Okay. I think that once residents became isolated and having their meals in their room, they weren't getting the same type of choices as they would in the dining room. For example, we have iPads with the choices of meals, so you can get a vegetable off of one plate and the meat from another plate. You could be able to share that around and see it. But in your room, you don't see these iPads. So the resident doesn't feel that they have as much of a choice because they're not sure, they can't see what it's like. I think it would increase their appetite if they saw the picture of the meals, and then they would feel better about eating instead of saying, I wonder what's going to come.
Thank you, Sharon. We've got another person sharing. We've got Patricia. I'm just going to see if I can unmute you, Patricia. There's a challenge being shared when residents were on isolation, maintaining those food temperatures. Patricia, you might be self-muted, but if you'd like to, okay, she doesn't have a microphone. Not to worry, but that's definitely a challenge that I know Professor Keller touched on, and I think that's something experienced in most homes that are providing tray service. I know we did have a few questions that came in advance of the webinar that I've got at my fingertips here. I know some homes were wondering about the viability, or people would like to know, for those who are conducting multiple seatings, then we would like to know how does that look in the homes? I apologize, I've got Heather muted now, so let me try to unmute her. Feel free to continue typing into the chat box there. Sorry, Heather, you're back. I do apologize.
Okay. Thanks. I did have a suggestion around the hot meals.
Oh, great.
So yeah, from my understanding, if you can use the dome covers, that actually helps to retain the heat a whole lot better than if you are trying to take things from the kitchen and just on a styrofoam or a styrofoam container with a plate over top. The dome covers seem to hold in the heat a bit better. If you can figure out how to do even a modified bulk delivery, so think about using a cart and using steam table that might be lined or even in some sort of insulated carrying outfit, like you would a cooler, for example, something that helps to insulate the food a bit, and delivering it right at the door side, I guess, not at the bedside for the resident. That might be helpful as well to try to keep things hot. With respect to the choice, that is a tricky one, isn't it? And so I've heard about staff coming around and asking individuals what they want, but again, without visualizing, it can be challenging for people to choose. This is again where a hot cart might be a better option, but still then the plating of an option is showing them the plate or the various options can be a challenge too with respect to touching that or taking between rooms for residents. So that's definitely a challenge for sure. I'm not sure if we can figure out about how even doing pictures that might be laminated and shown to residents, but again, touching is probably the concern that we have between residents and rooms. So really a tough problem there. So if anybody has any solutions that they come up with, that'd be great.
Heather, we have a great problem solving that's come through from Michelle Edwards. She said the challenge with the food temperature was something the home was working on. They used insulated bags and they served the food outside of each resident's door. So that helped to lock in the temperature until it was delivered.
That's great. Yeah.
We've got another resident sharing. If a home is COVID-free, is it possible, can the home organize a schedule to allow the resident to be able to have someone to talk to at a distance acceptable? For example, having small groupings of residents dining together using that physical distancing.
Yeah, I think we're seeing that now with certainly 2 residents at a table. My mom's home is COVID-free and has been the entire time. And so they do have 2 residents eating at a table, not 4, and doing 2 seatings. So I think that's happening in homes that have never been touched by COVID or only team members. That is happening. Whether with respect to family coming in, I'm not hearing about that yet. And I think it's because of the high risk of our vulnerable older adults in residences. Having those volunteers and family coming in isn't there yet. I don't know when that's going to happen, and that would be a public health sort of guidance for sure that we have to follow.
Okay, we've got another suggestion from Sasha for showing the show plates to give residents that important choice at mealtimes. The suggestion was to have the show plates covered in saran wrap, so that if someone did accidentally touch the plate, the food would be compromised.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is just the importance of the residents having this opportunity to choose before meal service. So that would be a step done in advance, which is usually done in the dining rooms.
Yeah, and exactly. And everybody wants to know what their food looks like, I think, in this environment, regardless of their capacity to make decisions around food, right? And so I think that's a great strategy. It's the same thing we do in dining rooms. Why can't we do it in the resident rooms as well? It does take more time, and that's maybe why it's not being done.
I did like your suggestion, Heather, earlier about kind of getting creative and deploying different team members, not necessarily the dietary team to be assisting with meal service, to make it an activity, to make it fun. I've heard of homes having music playing in the hallways, so that and having residents kind of facing outwards. I've seen that used for bingo and other programming, but it could also be used for meals to still have that,
Absolutely.
that physically distanced engagement with peers and enjoy a meal as a social time.
I think one of the things we've realized too is we don't necessarily have all the things you'd want in a resident's room to do things, like, for example, tables to eat off of, right? So homes had to scramble with respect to getting, seating that works for people. Often people might have an easy chair in their room and then no other chair, right? So this has been, we've had to stretch our thinking about and getting some of that equipment in place for some of these things as well.
We've got a great idea that's come through from Sarah, and she's using a strategy. Earlier you spoke, Heather, about calling a loved one before a meal to get their appetite stimulated. So in a similar fashion, this home is setting up FaceTime calls with a loved one during the meal, so that they can have a social chat while enjoying a meal. So
that's
of course,
great.
it does require the technology and the team power to get that set up, but great idea.
Absolutely, absolutely. My mother-in-law lives in an independent apartment, and we chat with her on Saturday nights, and she has no challenges physically, but just that seeing her face to face and chatting over a meal is an amazing thing for her and for us, right? And so I think for families and residents, that's an amazing idea.
What are sorry, go ahead, Heather.
I was just going to say the second seating. I'd love to hear what homes who have started to use the second seating, 2 seatings for meals, how that's going. Have they found it's taking more time? Are they able to stretch it out? What are they doing that they might be able to share with other folks?
I haven't seen any suggestions come through yet on that particular topic. I think every home is at a different stage of readiness to transition back to the dining room, so that might be something to think about as residents are able to maybe return to congregate dining in some way, shape, or form. If you haven't considered the staggered meal times, that might be something to discuss as a team and to get resident input as to how they'd envision that working. I know even before our COVID situation, many homes were offering staggered meal times.
That's great. And just thinking about the one of the positives that we heard from colleagues, that they got more funding for dietary staff. You know, this is where it could be used, right? You could extend that meal time so that it actually, you had the time to do all the things that you'd want to do with residents, regardless of the number in the dining room, right? So it means maybe going from 11:30 to 1:30 for lunch instead of 12 to 1. That's great.
Okay, I'm just gonna unmute Sharon again. She's got a few great ideas to share.
Thanks, Melissa. Heather, talking to other residents in other homes across Ontario, I've found that there's various ways they're dealing with meal times. Quite a few of them are still eating in their rooms, whether there is COVID or not. Some have no COVID and are still in the rooms eating. But some of the ideas that came up were they were eating in their hallways. Their bedside tables were put in the doorways. That way they could kind of peek their head over and say hi to their neighbor while they were eating. That would be more pleasurable as well. And another instance was they were taking 2 at a time, putting them in a family room, and a couple in the dining room, just so that they were spread out, but they were alternating. Like one hallway would do it today, the next hallway would do it tomorrow. So that way they're getting a little bit out of the room.
That's great.
Yeah, so we've heard of ideas that way, and I think they were very pleased with it.
Yeah, exactly. Something is better than nothing, right? So figuring out how to do that social piece with meals, if it's sitting in the hallway or sitting at the doorway, as you say, and looking across the hallway at your colleagues, or
it's so important.
Numbers. It's huge.
Yeah, as a resident, while they're in their room like that, during mealtime, any other time, they're always wondering what's happening on the other side of the walls, because they can't go out in the hall. They hear things, but they can't be part of anything. And I think that's the biggest part of isolation, depression, and the unknown. Because they don't know, it's frustrating to them. They want to be able to help somebody if they hear them, but they can't do it. And I think that's a huge problem with residents totally isolated all the time. If they were allowed something at a mealtime where they could peek down the hall and say hello, it would give them that little bit of satisfaction.
Yeah, there's someone else out there, right? Yeah. It's really important. Being able to see that reflected on others, right? Yeah, that's really important.
Oh yeah, for sure.
We do have a great response that came through from Cindy. At her home, they have been trialing the 2 seatings. So for breakfast, for example, that used to start at 8:30. They've now starting a bit early at 8 o'clock, and they use all hands on deck. We heard that expression from you earlier, Heather, to assist residents who need some support with dining. And it's been very positive. It's one of those positive outcomes, unexpected positive outcomes, that team members who were never part of mealtime, assisting with dining, etc., they never have that exposure. Now they're doing it, and it's a mutually beneficial activity that they're enjoying together.
And that's relationship-centered care at its best, right? Both the resident and the team member are in relationship, and they both benefit. There's actually a really interesting paper written by Katrina Steele during the SARS outbreak several years ago. And I believe it was Baycrest was the hospital, and
That's
it was a
right.
similar sort of thing. And she actually had done a qualitative study talking to the team members who were receptionists and others, and they got involved assisting residents that needed total assistance for meals. And they said it was a really empowering, enriching experience for them as the team member. So this is, I hope that that idea that the team members who are not typically involved in foods feel that and realize this is a very powerful thing for themselves as team members, as well as obviously benefiting the residents.
Yes, thank you. Cindy added to her response there. She said the team brought up extra tables that are long in length so that 2 residents could dine at the same table during those staggered meal times. And some tables were also set up in the dining room to kind of extend the dining space, but that having the 2 meal times is working out very well, and bringing that social aspect back to dining has been very well received. Patricia had a similar experience. Patricia said they do 1 meal time. They have 2 residents per table. They're able to do this because each unit has its own like satellite dining room, so they're able to do that.
Great. Yeah, and spreading them out into recreation areas as well. You know, you can maybe make the one time of meals work, right? Yeah, that's great. Yeah, the crises of, you know, it's a mother of invention, right? With the challenges we come in to with this experience. And so I'm hoping that some of these innovations and the benefits that we're seeing, like many residents sitting at a table, that might be something we move towards rather than away from once this is over.
Excellent. Would anyone else like to share maybe about how meals are looking, or how you hope or envision them in the future?
I'm just going to move on to the next slide for folks if they are interested in seeing some of the resources that might be of use to them at this time. So they can write those down if they don't have the handout.
And I think, as you said, Heather, a lot of the unforeseen positives that have come out of this situation really might change our practices moving forward. Even this idea of having multiple meal sittings might be a lasting practice that we continue on. So I think it's important to continue to collect resident feedback, what's working
Exactly.
and what's not working, because I'm sure residents always have, they're living and breathing this experience, and so they are your experts. They're the ones who might be thinking of solutions that you haven't even considered yet. So
that's right.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that OARC can do some of that work with residents. That would be wonderful.
It's Sharon speaking, Melissa. I think also too, once COVID is over, and we know things have to change in long-term care, but I think the pleasurable dining and stuff that we learned a few years back about bringing into long-term care, I think if that comes back and more like a choice and more pleasurable, I think it will help a lot. And if they have to spread residents, you know, it may be more pleasurable. We don't know, right?
Yep. We've got an idea or a feedback that's been shared from Angie in Sudbury. Their home is getting ready to start small group dining programs where they're actually going to order in food and give residents a treat. So I know that with the nicer weather coming or starting now, we know we love the smells of barbecue, and people are longing to bring back those diners clubs or those special meal clubs and having themed meals. How can we start to embrace these popular programs and adapt them to our current context?
Right. Yeah. And so barbecue or ice cream sundae making, can we now do that in the hallway, right? Certainly ice cream making, we could ice cream sundae making we do in the hallway in some shape or form, and get residents come to the door and say what they would like in their sundae, and maybe sit in the doorway as Sharon's indicated, and share their conversation with their friends. Barbecue is similar. I mean, can we figure out how to have residents come down and take a look at the barbecue while it's being made, and then going back to the room if they need be to eat, but at least they've been part of the experience, gotten out of their room perhaps, and been part of what's going on, which would be great.
A number of residents have shared they miss those simple pleasures of being able to, for those who are ambulatory or those who are able to travel down the street to visit a local coffee shop. I unfortunately don't know the name of the home to credit them appropriately, but there was a home, I believe it might be Muskoka Landing, and they actually worked with a local Tim Hortons, and they created a little Tim Hortons shop in the home, so residents could get a Timbit and a coffee as if they were going out to the community or having a loved one bringing that special treat in for them. So it was bringing the Tim Hortons in the community into the home. So I hope we continue to work on those community relationships too.
Well, you know, maybe that's another positive of COVID-19 is now the communities see long-term care homes, right? I think we've ignored them, perhaps. The community has ignored them. And now we see them, unfortunately, because of what's happened, but we see them as neighbors that we need to care for.
Excellent. I don't see any other messages coming through on the chat box, and we're about 3 minutes after 3. So I just wanted to take this opportunity, Heather, on behalf of the team and the board on the Ontario Association of Residents Councils, a sincere thank you to you for being with us today, for kind of leading this discussion, for kind of recognizing where we are and helping us envision and have some hope to where we might go in the future as it relates to mealtimes and the importance of mealtimes. And so thank you so much.
You're most welcome, and thank you for having the conversation. It's inspired me as well. And I hope that everyone has gotten a little glimmer of how we can keep things being social with meals towards the quality of life of residents. That is our goal, and how we can use the opportunities we have in front of us to strive to do better. So thank you.
That's right.
And at OARC, we love to give homes a nice spotlight and to share your promising practices, share your experiences, whether they're a challenge that you've overcome, because your ideas might inspire other homes across the province. So I encourage you to write into us, to share pictures and stories so that we can continue to share these in our various communications. We have a monthly newsletter, and our next magazine of seasons will be distributed in the fall. So we really want to share what you're up to, so please stay in touch. Thank you again, everyone, and have a great afternoon.